Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of Specimens. My name is Elle and I'm the host of this podcast where we talk all things science, conservation and of course specimens. So it's been a minute. It's been a couple of months since the last episode went out, and whilst I could talk to you about all the reasons that I took a short hiatus from the show, I don't think we need to do that. I'm excited to dive right in with today's episode with the most phenomenal guest, Celina Chien. Amongst many things, Celina is an intersectional environmentalist and storyteller. She combines her work as an ecologist, photojournalist and artist to harness empathy for change and to advocate for biodiversity. In this conversation, Celina outlines some really important biodiversity concerns as well as social issues. If you want to find more about her work, and you most definitely will after listening to this episode, just see all of the show notes attached to the bottom of the episode. But for now, here it is. Celina, I'm thrilled to be speaking with you. Thank you so much for giving up your time to speak with me today. How are you doing and where are you at the moment?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be on here. So excited to meet with you, speak with you. I'm currently in London, which is my base, but I have been on the road since November, mostly for work. And it's nice to just kind of stay put in one place for a while sometimes.
Well, I mean, you can tell me all about the things that have been keeping you busy in a moment, and I'm super excited to get into that. But before we do that, I'd love if you could take me right back to the start and tell me when the natural world started becoming important to you and what the world looked like through your eyes.
Oh, that's a beautiful question. I have quite a different entry into the world of, nature and biology and being obsessed with the natural world. Most people have quite a lot of exposure to it as a child, and then their parents take them out on hikes and things like that or whatnot. I actually grew up in the city of Beijing in China, and at the time that I was growing up there was little to no green spaces in the city. So I grew up very much in the concrete jungle, and I think it was actually the deprivation of nature, and it was actually the lack of nature that made me realize just how much I love it, just how much I need it in my life. And it wasn't even like at the time of being a child I was really craving for something. It was the fact that even the most insignificant little creature that most people would not really care about, like a pigeon or a sparrow or a cricket, would really, really excite me just because there wasn't much other wildlife to see. And luckily, I was, privileged enough to have a little garden where I grew up. And so I was really encouraged to spend time outside, and I grew little strawberries and we had persimmon trees, which is quite a Chinese thing. So it's both like entrenched in the culture of growth and fostering new life and being responsible for life and in a garden, but also just never really being exposed to nature. And I'm both, I have heritage from all over the place, and so I was lucky enough to travel to Europe to visit some of my family sometimes, um and seeing crows and seeing magpies and seeing other animals that Europeans might find really boring, I was so enamored with. And so even to this day, if I see a crow, if I see a pigeon, I'm going to stop and look and admire. And it's the same for some of the really, cool, charismatic megafauna wildlife that I get to see for my work. So yeah.
I mean, if you're speaking to anyone about loving underrated or perhaps overrated birds, then I'm your person. So you're in a safe space here. So how then, Celina, did you foster and harness this love of the natural world into something a little bit more concrete, academically and thus professionally?
I feel like a lot of people just fall into this, and I think it starts off as an obsession, and then it isn't until, and it's only really if you're lucky enough to have a very good teacher to kind of hold you and hold your hand in that space, or metaphorically, and to kind of show you that you could actually do something with this academically, and to pique your interests academically. And so I was always lucky enough to have really, really extraordinary supportive teachers in schools and things like that, who kind of always encouraged curiosity. But it really wasn't until, I guess in the UK it would be year 10, which is high school, the equivalent of high school, that it wasn't even like an interest in biology academically, but it was just because I was obsessed with animals. Like watching David Attenborough shows and reading National Geographic magazine and going to the museums. As a child, I think I made my parents watch Jurassic Park with me well over 200 times. And so it's just like a genuine obsession with anything alive. And just realizing one day that, oh my God, I could spend my whole life doing this, just learning and obsessing. And of course, naturally, when you love the natural world and all the creatures that inhabit it, in this day and age, you also learn about the destruction that we wreak upon the planet. We are, you learn about climate change, at least I did, from an early age. I learned about, the destruction of the rainforest from an early age. And it's that age-old quote of, if you love something, you'll want to protect it. And so very naturally, I just decided my calling is in conservation. Almost because I couldn't possibly imagine doing anything else right now. Yeah.
Celina, I would love to know how you moved from having what you described as an obsession, and I have to admit, your charisma and your passion does ease out through your cadence, and it's beautiful to hear. And it's why you're so dynamic with what you do today, and we'll come to that. But how then did you focus that a little bit more, cement it into an actual path? I think there'll be people listening who want to know, what was your first professional job working with the natural world?
Yeah. It started out, I initially thought, okay, the only pathway into wildlife conservation is through research.
Okay.
I thought the only job out there is to become a biologist and to do the research. And that was kind of the only way to realize, in a professional sense, when you're 16 years old, you're like, I guess I have to choose something for university now. And I have to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And I'm going to, and so in the early years, I was very focused on becoming a biologist, becoming a researcher. And unfortunately, in this industry and in the conservation industry, so much of it starts out with volunteering. With research assistantships, with internships. And that is just like inherently unfair, because only a certain kind of people can, take the opportunity to do voluntary work. And it's also, not to mention the fact that like STEM is already, there are a lot of systemic barriers to STEM as is, whether you're a person of color, whether you come from a certain socioeconomic background, whether you're a woman, whether you speak English. So it's like everyone really, we all have to acknowledge that those barriers are very real. And I was just I'm privileged enough to be able to do that. And I started out going into research and kind of very quickly realizing that the research world was not for me. I think a thing that we all often ask ourselves, at least I do, especially those of us who really care and want to make a difference in the world, is what I'm doing actually amounting to any change? And of course, science does. And it is super important. But in terms of, am I making any change? And am I also putting my skills to the test? And am I also doing what I do best? Because something that, again, like, yes, I am totally obsessed with nature, but there were so many different careers that I wanted to take. I almost took a degree in English literature because I love poetry. I almost went to drama school because I love singing and dancing and acting. And so I think it's, we also need to acknowledge that, like, it's not that easy. And there are very few people who kind of really just know what they want to do. So it's totally okay if you have no idea what you want to do. You have to make decisions. But anyway, I realized that I wasn't really the best suited to research. And I just didn't enjoy it very much in the day-to-day. And so that is why I moved into the media space. And I didn't even know the job of being a wildlife photographer existed when I started out. And it really was just because I was at the right place at the right time, and I ran into some people while in the field that that saw, oh, you have quite a good eye at this. Have you ever considered filmmaking or photography? And I just didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know that conservation photography existed. I didn't, again, it's like, in terms of representation, there weren't any people like that looked like me that were doing it. So it was just, oh, I didn't even realize it was an option. And so that's how I fell into the media side. And also, that's just what I'm good at. I'm good at telling stories. And I'm also a deeply emotional person. And I felt quite a lot in the scientific space. It was like, oh, don't anthropomorphize and don't get emotional. And it's like, we're living in the midst of a sixth mass extinction. How am I supposed to not get emotional? And of course, science is objective. And so I was like, how is there a disconnect between what we're doing as scientists or what we're doing as communicators and how we're affecting how people make decisions? And we inherently make decisions based off of our emotions and our feelings. And so I thought communicating science and communicating the environmental crisis through visual storytelling, whether that's photography or documentary film or impact campaigning, I just felt that is my path. That's where I need to go, because it's what I love to do. That's what I'm good at. And that's where I feel I can let, my emotions guide me.
Well, I think as somebody who is outside of science, but sort of in some way or another straddling the science sphere with what I do, and in listening to what you're saying about storytelling, I think one of the reasons that science is so inaccessible, and that's not even before we enter into some of the STEM barriers that you touched on earlier, is this disconnect between quote unquote proper science and scientists or people who are, in the peripherals or doing good conservation work, doing, proper science, but they don't have a PhD or they don't have letters after their name or something. And I think the language and the communication between those people and everybody else there's a gulf. And as you say, we're right on the brink of something so severe and irreversible that we need to communicate to the layman. We need to communicate to the people who maybe aren't interested in science, who aren't going to understand jargon, who aren't going to understand that kind of communicative research. Do you feel as though being somebody that's straddling what I would say is quote unquote proper science and a scientific genre of work, you struggle with pressures of feeling like, like an outsider, or like you're not being taken seriously in the science genre?
Yes, absolutely. I think when I was studying my undergrad in biology and then doing my master's in tropical ecology, I was very aware of the fact that I was doing this in order to be taken seriously later on in my life and in my career. A significant amount of motivation for me finishing my degrees from the institutions that I did finish them at were because, I know that if I want to communicate to the public, or if I want to communicate to people who are in positions of decision-making power regarding the environmental crises we face, they're only going to take me seriously as a person, but also particularly as a woman and a woman of color, if I have the qualifications and accreditations that matter to them. And that doesn't actually in any way undermine my love for science, because I really am like a total nerd. I wish I could, I remember going to university and just loving it so much. I loved going every day. There would be a new lecture about evolution or biology or like governance of nature, things like this, and just being so excited about what I was going to learn that day. And the way my mind works is quite naturally scientific, and I am constantly asking questions about the world and figuring out how best we can answer them. And I am naturally just very interested in what's happening in the spheres of innovation and information. But at the same time, that's not for everybody. And there's like a great deal of effort that goes into taking those scientific concepts and trying to translate them into other stories that can engage anyone. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but as well as being a photographer and an ecologist right now, I'm also an actor. And being based in London, I have, like a lot of friends in spheres that are entirely foreign to the world of science communication. And I can sit down, say at a dinner or at a party and talk about the evolution of sexual dichromatism in birds.
I want to come to a dinner party with you.
And the thing is, it's like interesting people are the most interested. People who are like really passionate and curious about the world are like they just, you want to learn more about whatever it is, whether it's someone talking about trains or whether that's someone talking about trees. And if you can, as long as you know how to take that information and convey it to people in a language that they understand and convey it to them in a language that they can connect to emotionally as well, then we can talk about science and even like the most complicated topics to anyone. You just have to kind of ground it and make it relevant and not relevant, but like make it relevant in real world circumstances, if that makes sense. And so it's actually just a really fun activity to try to do. Take some topic that you think is really complicated and try to explain it to the, quote unquote layman. But also scientists hate this. Scientists are like, oh, you're oversimplifying it and you're not conveying, and actually you're generalizing and it's not, and you're anthropomorphizing. So there's always a balance. And I'm very grateful for my scientific background and the scientific literacy that I have. But I'm also extremely grateful that I know how to take that information and spread the love, so to speak, because there are plenty of scientists who could like really can't do that.
I think that was a beautiful summary of your passion and your fervent dedication. On the other side of that, because I feel as though you communicated that in a really positive manner, and I think that's what we need, but how do you feel, and can you contextualize some of the sort of greater concepts at play? I know that you come from an ecology background. I know that you talk a lot when I was researching, and I discovered a lot about you, about the climate crisis, biodiversity crisis. And can you contextualize what that means to you and what you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest obstacles to people indulging in scientific topics is because people feel that it's abstract or it's complicated, or quite often it can be quite a condescending space. Like, oh, I can't believe you don't know what that is. I can't believe you don't understand this concept. And it's not, and it's, I think we all just have to have way more understanding and empathy and patience with each other, because not everyone comes from the same baseline amount of education, and not everyone had good teachers. And whenever I talk about these concepts with anyone, regardless of how much scientific background they have, like, I will define the terminology. I will explain the basics of evolution, because even if you did learn about evolution at school, it's like very likely that actually your understanding of evolution is not actually aligned with the reality. It's not a matter of giraffes wanted to reach the leaves at the top of the trees so their necks grew longer. No. It's any giraffe that had a slightly shorter neck just died. Like, it's and I feel like these kind of concepts that seem really basic to us, actually, it's like, just be so much more forgiving and on yourself and other people around you, that no, we don't actually all know what that means, and that's okay.
Totally.
And so when it comes to things like the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, I assume, and maybe it's an uncomfortable assumption for some people, but most of the time it's met with gratitude. But I just assume that the majority of people don't know what biodiversity means. Because unless you study biology at university, it's very unlikely that you came across the topic in school or in any other course. And it's very unlikely that, you were walked through it. And biodiversity, people kind of, you can say, sure, it's the number of species or it's the richness of species, but actually it's so much more complicated than that. It's biodiversity is the diversity of life on every scale, from genes to different individuals in a population, to different populations across a landscape, to different kinds of landscapes across a continent, to, you can apply it at any scale, and you can apply it to different species or different trophic levels, different functional roles in an ecosystem. So actually, even within the scientific community, there is no consensus. If someone says the word biodiversity, you have to describe exactly what you mean by that and what metric you're measuring. So in terms of, speaking to the general public or speaking to someone who may be unfamiliar with it, it's start with the basics, and that's okay.
I think that there's going to be so many little tidbits. I just feel as though it's going to be like the podcast mantra of like things that you said. And in that vein, I feel as though articulating the climate crisis, it goes back to what you were saying about visual storytelling, because I think we're seeing a lot more of a connection from people outside of science to things that are relatable in their lives. Celina, with that being said, are you happy to talk a little bit about some of the larger barriers, some of the things that you've touched on yourself, sexism, racism, the space that you're in isn't overtly accessible and relies a lot on socioeconomic background. What are the restrictions that you have personally found, and how do you maintain faith to overcome them? By the way, if I ask any question that you're not comfortable with, you just let me know.
Oh, no. I am more than comfortable asking. It's more just like, I have to acknowledge that I have come from an enormous place of privilege, first and foremost.
Okay.
I have, I grew up in the global north. I speak multiple languages. I went to a prestigious university in the United Kingdom. So these are all things where I have like an enormous, head start in the race, so to speak. But at the same time, a lot of the barriers I have faced are related to people making huge assumptions about who I am, what I'm capable of, and what I'm supposed to be doing with my life, just based on what I look like and what I sound like. And so, and everyone faces this, but particularly in certain countries where the rights of women are just not at all up to speed with where I've grown up and where I've been lucky enough to grow up, or whether that's facing systemic and institutionalized racism on a daily basis here in the global north. I can't really think of any specific examples at the top of my head, just because. So I try not to kind of like trauma dump and trauma share, just because it isn't actually very constructive. It's helpful for us to share our experiences, but at the same time, and it's helpful for us to share our experiences so that other individuals know that they're not alone, and they know that they're not facing these challenges alone. And quite often I find it so beneficial to find community, and so the what's the word? the biggest way that I've been able to overcome lots of these challenges is a sense of community and finding community, whether that's working with other women in the conservation space, other women in the photography space, whether that's finding other people of color in these spaces. And it's finding a group of people who you can share these stories with and help each other. And I think also most importantly, we focus a lot on kind of like lateral networking.
Okay.
So networking, vertical networking. We focus a lot on vertical networking and networking upwards and trying to communicate with people who are currently in positions of power or currently farther ahead of us in our careers. And actually, there's so much more power to be had by collaborating with people who are at your level and working with other people at your age, because you are all just as invested in each other and like in your own success and helping each other, collaborating with each other. I mean, I'm part of this organization called Girls Who Click, which I came across a few years ago, and it's so wonderful to meet other women in the conservation photography space, to be mentored by other women in this space, to watch each other grow, to ask each other advice. Doing field work as a biologist, it's just something as simple as the fact that on almost every expedition I've been on, I've been the only woman.
Okay.
That is not a comfortable or safe experience.
Mm-mm.
I always get asked, what's the most dangerous animal? Or what's the most dangerous, situation you've been in? But I always say, yeah, you know what? The most dangerous animal I've ever encountered in the field is a man. 100%. Every single time.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I am far more afraid to be alone in a room with a man than to be, like a few meters away from a big cat in the jungle. Because at least their behavior is predictable. And it's also silly. It's not silly. It's not silly at all, actually.
No.
It's things like, what do you do when you're on your period and you're in the field? I've worked in countries where I've been in the field and I'm not allowed to be on my own as a woman. I have to wear, a head covering as a woman. And that's, of course, respecting the local culture, but it does, if you're not used to it, it does make things a little more difficult. I've been in situations where even though I'm, quote unquote, the team leader, the expedition leader, the orchestrator, people would refuse to respect me and refuse to follow, basic instructions. And there are lots of these barriers. And for someone who may have exclusively grown up in the global north in North America or Europe, these things can be extremely jarring. I'm lucky enough to have kind of grown up in many, many countries. And so I guess I'm a bit more used to it, but it is extremely exhausting. And you just spend so much time and energy wasting away at these tiny little battles. It's like, is this really a hill that I'm going to have to die on? Or can I just do my work? Can I just do the work that's important? It's the same as kind of like, it's really important to decolonize conservation and to approach conservation from an intersectional perspective. So much of the conservation work and so much of the conservation projects that I've worked on are heavily, heavily influenced by colonial legacies. And I've been in situations where I've been so deeply uncomfortable about how an organization or a field station or how a story is being run or told. And we frankly need young people from diverse backgrounds entering these spaces and telling their stories, because quite frankly, the most important thing right now is hearing those stories, especially from a photojournalism's perspective. We're learning about the world through these visual stories, and we have historically only been learning about it from a single perspective. And it's not even necessarily that men's perspectives are different to women's perspectives. everyone's perspective is different. Everyone's perspective is going to be shaped by their life experiences. It's just that all women are going to have a shared experience of oppression through the patriarchy, and just as all people of color are going to have the shared experience of oppression through colonialism and white supremacy. And we have a lot to say and a lot to give in those stories, whether that's scientifically on how we phrase hypotheses, whether that's from a journalism and photography angle, and how we can tell stories without vilifying people of color from the global south and blaming all of the world's problems in the environmental space on people in the global south, and how we can reframe a lot of these stories in a more constructive way that actually, rather than pitting certain groups of people against each other, we can have more empathy for each other, and we can understand where different communities are coming from and try to find solutions in that respect. Very long answer.
But it's very needed and it's essential. And I think it's really interesting listening to you talk, because there was a period in that where you almost did a caveat and sort of tried to justify some of the things you were saying, which I think is a predominant thing that a lot of young professionals do, is we try to like caveat on what we're saying to undermine ourselves. And I think that that's so crazy. It's almost like we're trying to bend into and break to fit this, societal standards. So I almost noticed you doing it, and then I thought, and then you didn't, and then you kind of corrected yourself, and you were like, no, I'm gonna, I'm gonna say what I have to say. So fair play. And I think it was, incredibly powerful to hear it. To that point, how do you maintain being hopeful when you are experiencing and witnessing some frankly devastating truths on a day-to-day basis through either your photojournalism? I know you've worked doing some research with the illegal wildlife trade. How do you, as somebody who is a science communicator that people are looking to for hope, how do you maintain that level of hope? And do you suffer with any eco-anxiety, which is something that I know people connect with a lot at the moment?
If I don't do it, who's gonna do it? But at the same time, no, I am really hopeful because nature is resilient. Nature is incredibly resilient, and I'm lucky enough to have that deep scientific understanding of just how resilient nature is, and how if we do give her the space, she will bounce back, and that biodiversity and the climate and ecological processes and functions can restore themselves if we just back off. And also because there's so much exciting innovation and research happening, it's not ready yet, or it's not necessarily in the public sphere yet, but there's so many interesting things happening, and human ingenuity is such an exciting thing to witness. Of course, it is extremely irritating and frustrating and disenchanting and infuriating to see a very, very small number of people profiting off of the destruction of the planet. And I always call it out as, I equate the willful destruction of the natural world for profit as mass murder. It's the mass murder of current generations and future generations of not only human beings, but other non-human creatures and animals and processes and functions. So I don't actually think I do suffer from eco-anxiety, because I did reach a point in my life where I was becoming so anxious and, quite frankly, depressed about the state of the world. And seeing it firsthand is terrifying and painful. But at the same time, I know that I'm doing the best that I can. And I trust my work, and I trust and I see the beautiful work of the people around me that is rising up through the ranks. And at the same time, what is the point of spending all this energy to save a planet if we don't get to enjoy living on it? and finding the joy and holding on to laughter and dancing and being able to relish in the beauty of the natural world, that is what should pull you forward and propel you. It shouldn't be fear, because you're going to burn out if it's fear. If it's fear and anger, you're going to burn out. It's going to get exhausting, and you're going to, quite frankly, like a lot of people are just going to completely destroy themselves from the inside out, or the outside in, But it's letting the joy propel you forward, and also realizing that joy and rest is an act of resistance. And I just often I find little acts of rebellion, like a small dandelion bursting through the concrete, the greatest sense of inspiration and hope and motivation.
Thank you for that, Celina. There's a lot to take from that. I really want to give you the chance to... I'm very aware that we've talked a lot about larger political concepts, but I haven't really allowed you the opportunity to talk about some of the incredible work that you've done. So although this probably feels like me jumping around a little bit, I'm going to allow us to end on a huge high. Tell us some of the incredible work that you've been doing that's been keeping you recently. You said at the beginning that you've been out at appointments. What's been keeping you busy recently? What can we get excited about that you've got in the future?
Oh, that's I'm so glad I get to talk about that. Yeah, I guess because so many of the people in the space are also, influencers or activists or whatever, and have social media personalities, I have kind of strayed away from that, and a lot of my work isn't actually attached to my name per se online, just because that's, sometimes it can get in the way if you're working with certain stakeholders from certain countries and things like that. Your personal opinions can get in the way, and so you do just want to be able to make sure that you can do the work and your persona won't get in the way. But anyway, I'm working on a really, really exciting project right now. It's kind of a multi-year situation. I just got appointed a board member of Panthera, which is a big cat conservation NGO that does tons of scientific research on big cat conservation and ecology, as well as funding and supporting boots on the ground conservation. The reason why I hugely support big cat conservation is because cats span and because cats inhabit huge swathes of area, and they go across massive amounts of ecosystems and have really powerful ecological roles. So by protecting one charismatic animal and the landscape that they inhabit, you protect the entire ecologies that they steward. So I'm working on a really exciting project focused on the leopard right now. Leopards are the widest ranging big cats in the world, going from the tip of southern Africa all the way through the Middle East, South Asia, to the far east of Russia and North China. They are incredibly resilient. They live both in complete wilderness, desert, Siberian forest, as well as cities like Mumbai. And I am focusing on how we can have intersections of completely different industries and worlds. So the scientific world, the conservation world, the media and storytelling world, as well as design and fashion, and how we can get completely new audiences engaged in conservation, completely new audiences engaged in conservation through the leopard and the beauty of leopard print. And so recently I had a photo exhibition with Dolce&Gabbana that kind of paired fashion inspired by leopards as well as my photography. And it was a huge success, bringing completely new audiences, as well as raising quite a lot for big cat conservation. And I'm just taking that and scaling it up all over the world and basically in the works of designing a super exciting impact campaign to help leopard conservation. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. Well, you're already I thought at the beginning of the conversation, and actually I thought when I was researching, you know, she's already flourished, but I feel like you're only just getting started, which is the most exciting thing.
Oh yeah. This is just the beginning. Yeah.
Celina, at the very beginning of our conversation, you talked about the power of a good teacher, and I think without patronizing you, you are the most remarkable teacher for us all. And I think just having your conversation out there has been really special for me. Thank you so much for giving up your time and for being on my podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And that's such a kind compliment. I absolutely love talking about nature, the natural world, and conservation to people, to new people, but also to young people and kids. And yeah, so thank you. That's a huge compliment. Thank you.
An enormous thank you to Celina for being such an impassioned guest and for giving us so much to take away. I really loved speaking with Celina. I had such a lovely time. Despite talking about some really heavy issues, Celina has a way of communicating her story and the story of our planet in a way that feels really uplifting and positive. So I hope you were able to connect to that. And now you can connect to her. There are so many places that you can find her. Check out her incredible work on celinachien.com. You can find her on Instagram at Celina Chien. You can find her on Twitter at Celina Chien, and there are other further links at her Linktree, which can be found in her bio. I know that the climate crisis can feel really scary sometimes, but I hope through conversations like this one with Celina, you are feeling a bit more assured that there are people out there fighting the good fight for all of us and for our beautiful planet. I'll see you next time.